Drum filters, overpriced, unreliable gimmick, or essential for any koi pond? In this video we're going to find out. I'm Darren and you're watching Dazzle Koi. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the channel. Do hit the notification icon as well so you don't miss any future updates. I've got some crackers coming up in the near future. So yeah, do make sure you don't miss out on any of those. Drum filters, or to give them the full title, rotary drum filters, which is often abbreviated to RDF, come in two sort of distinct form factors. Essentially the drum filter itself is a purely mechanical filter, but nowadays manufacturers have started to tag a biological filter onto the end, all in one system. In that form it's known as a combi drum, but the term drum filter refers to just the mechanical filter itself. They can be pump fed or gravity fed. They range in the size of particle that they will filter out, which is dictated by the mesh, the screen on the drum itself. From about 60 microns up to about 120 microns is the range. Typically probably 70 microns is a common sort of size. And what that means is that the drum filter itself, on a single pass, you would expect that if you've got a 70 micron screen, the holes in that screen are 70 microns, any solid particle bigger than 70 microns will be taken out, captured, trapped by the screen. Anything smaller than that has a chance of passing through. In terms of the cost, range from anywhere from £1,000 up to, I found a drum for about £14,000, depending on the manufacturer and the size and the capacity of the drum itself. In terms of the capacity of the pond that they can handle and the flow rate that they can handle, the range varies considerably, from a very small pond, sort of a 1,000-gallon pond with a very small flow, up to Aquasource do a Synergy 100 combi, which I think can handle 100,000 litres per hour, so huge range of sizes and flow rates available. The smallest drum, I think, from a sort of a respectable manufacturer, mainstream drum, is the Draco Minima, which actually would be perfect for this pond, around 1,000 gallons. And they're at the cheaper end of the scale. They're around about the £1,000 mark. And the first sort of point worth making when you're looking to buy a drum filter, when you're speccing a drum filter, although there is obviously a vast range in price within any given manufacturer, a big part of the cost of a drum is in the electronics and the electrical side of it. So essentially the small drum, the Draco Minima that costs £1,000, still needs to have all those electronics in some form. So I guess what I'm saying is the cost difference isn't always as big as you would expect. So it is worth looking at probably a drum that's slightly bigger than you actually need, because, as I say, the cost increase will be minimal, and it gives you that sort of little bit of future proofing if you want to expand the size of your pond in the future or build a bigger pond. The only slight trade-off with that is that the bigger drum will utilise a bigger wash pump, so there will be a slight increase in running costs, although it's negligible. Drum filters can be pump or gravity fed. They can include a UV, a clarifier or a steriliser, or they can come without one and you can add an inline one yourself afterwards. They're available with various configurations of inlet and outlet. They tend to have multiple inlets and outlets, but the configuration varies slightly from manufacturer to manufacturer, and they're classed as a low maintenance filter. That's a good point worth noting. They're not maintenance free, as some believe. They are low maintenance. I actually recently ran a poll on the channel community tab. These are the results of the poll. Quite interesting. I wouldn't say a surprise, but one thing that did come up was this kind of maintenance and the various little bits of maintenance that you need to do, and I'll come back to that later on when I come to the pros and cons. As we stand or sit here today, there are a vast number of manufacturers of drums. They've been around about 15 years, and gradually the number of people making them has increased. I'll scroll some of them through the screen, but it's impossible for me to do them all. There really are a lot. Worth noting at this point, a lot of them are rebranded. So as with food and things like that, koi dealers tend to sign a supply agreement with a drum manufacturer, and then have the drums supplied to them and then badge them up themselves and sell them as their own. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with that. I think it's just worth you knowing who is manufacturing, and I think who your warranty is with, if your warranty is with that dealer or if your warranty is with the original manufacturer. And again, come on to warranty and after sales and things like that in a little bit later on. So what is a drum filter and how do they work? Firstly, I'll just very brief recap on filtration, and I've got videos on this with a lot more detail. Check them out later on. I'll put the link to those in the description below for you if you want to do that. But very briefly, filtration, 3 distinct forms: mechanical, biological, dilution. Mechanical is the removal of solid particles of waste, of uneaten food, of anything solid in the pond, that's tangible, that you can physically see and you can physically pick up. Biological is essentially the removal of ammonia. Ammonia is produced by koi as they process food, etc., etc. So the removal of that ammonia is biological filtration. And then dilution is for anything that isn't taken up by those first two. So things like urine, koi urine, pheromones, some nitrates, various other things that can only be removed by dilution. A drum filter is a mechanical filter. So a drum filter takes out the lumps of solid material that find their way into your pond system. And so, as I alluded earlier, you need to couple a drum filter with a biological filter, and you also need to take care of your own dilution. But you can now buy a combi drum which does have the biological incorporated within one footprint, although they do start, the downside of that is they do start to get a bit big. Dilution you need to look after separately. And essentially the principle is you take the water from your pond via gravity, via a pump, you pass it through a filter. The filter has tiny holes. If the holes are 70 microns, any particles in there that are bigger than 70 microns will be trapped. Any that are smaller will pass through back to your pond. And traditionally the dilemma with mechanical filtration is this: the bigger the holes in your sieve, screen, media, whatever it may be, the bigger the particles it will allow through, but the less it will reduce your flow, so the less back pressure on your pump, and the less quickly it will block up. Conversely, if you put very fine holes in there, your water will appear clearer because you're taking out much finer particles, but it will very quickly block up and it will put back pressure on your pump and restrict flow and need cleaning a lot more regularly. So that's kind of the dilemma facing mechanical filters, traditional mechanical filters. So rewind, if you will, back to 2007, and a German gentleman named Heinrich Sprick is accredited with developing the first drum filter for use in a pond, back garden pond system. The technology wasn't strictly his, he kind of adapted it from other areas, but he's accredited with sort of inventing the drum filter, if you like, back in 2007. And interestingly, he's credited with a lot of inventions around koi ponds and filtration. He actually also invented what we now know as a moving bed filter for biological filtration, which is essentially the bit that is tagged onto a drum to make it a combi drum, to make it a combi filter. So how does a drum filter actually work? How does it get around this dilemma of smaller holes equals better filtration equals blocking up quickly, needing cleaning more often? A drum filter takes the water. It can be pump fed. Most often than not they are gravity fed, so a bottom drain, as we have in this one, feeds the dirty water to the drum itself, sat in a filter house away from the pond usually. The water comes in, traditionally a 4-inch inlet, because they do handle big flows. It comes into a first chamber, which I'll call the dirty water chamber. From this dirty water chamber, it flows into the center of the drum itself. I'll keep banging some pictures up that hopefully will help explain what I'm trying to say. It goes into the center of the drum itself, and the drum is a cylinder formed from a mesh screen. And once the water is inside the drum, it naturally flows to the outside of the drum through the tiny holes in the screen, which, as I say, typically 70 microns is probably an average screen hole size. So it flows to the outside of the drum cylinder into another chamber, which we'll call the clean water chamber. This clean water chamber then either passes through to a biological filter of some form, usually a moving bed filter, or it has your pump connected directly, and the pump sends the clean water to your biological filter and ultimately back to your pond. And the thing that makes the drum special, as the drum itself sits submerged in pond water. So what happens is, as the holes in the drum screen block up, the water level in the dirty water chamber, the first chamber, starts to rise because the water is backing up, if you like, as the screen blocks. It starts to rise, and it then triggers a switch. That switch triggers a cleaning cycle, and a cleaning cycle consists of the drum rotating enough that the dirty screen that's submerged comes out of the water, and then as that's rotating from the top, a series of jets form a curtain of high pressure water firing down at the drum screen from the outside, pushing the dirt off the screen that was collected previously into a chute, which under gravity flows away to your drain. And the drum rotates, this cleans, and the previously cleaned screen goes on into the water, is submerged, and you then start the process again. It switches back to running mode. The level in the dirty water chamber has now dropped as it's not backing up, and the cycle begins again. And the point worth making, the nozzles themselves, the water for those nozzles, it can come from two sources, if you like. They can be fed by your mains water, so 1.52 bar up to sometimes 3 bar of mains water pressure, fed to those nozzles to generate the pressure to clean the screen. Or you can have a separate wash pump, which is usually a high wattage pump, usually 150 watts or so, because it's a high pressure pump, generates the pressure from your main supply, and that cleans the screen. So obviously you need to look into that. Your mains pressure, if it's high, you can get away without the wash pump and you can use mains pressure, which has its benefits, not least the fact that you don't need a very power hungry high pressure pump. And again, when we come onto the cons, I'll mention the wash pumps again. But if you don't have that high mains pressure, then you definitely will need a separate wash pump. I say separate, it is incorporated within the drum. So that's how they work. I'm going to now talk about pros and cons, and I'm going to start with the pros. And the first big benefit to a drum filter, and arguably the only big benefit to a drum filter, is that because of its nature, your mechanical waste, koi, feces, etc., is taken out of the water all the time, continuously, as it's produced. So the waste doesn't sit collected in a filter like most other mechanical filtration. You could argue, I've got videos, a lot of videos on this, but when a mechanical filter gathers the koi waste together in the filter, it's still in the pond, and arguably it's even worse because it's now concentrated together and it's having water forced through it under a bit of pressure and pushed and circulated around your pond. So arguably it's worse than if the waste was sat on the bottom of the pond. The big benefit to a drum filter is the drum filter collects the waste continuously and continuously removes it out and disposes of it, so it doesn't sit in the water with your koi. The second pro, low maintenance. I touched on this earlier. They're not maintenance free, they are low maintenance, and again I will talk about the maintenance a little bit later on, but they are low maintenance. Clearly that is a pro. Compared to every other mechanical filter, they are lower maintenance, and so definitely something to consider when you're choosing a filter for your pond. And lastly, the footprint. The footprint of a drum is quite small, certainly compared to lots of other filters such as multi-bay filters or even a Nexus, they can have quite a small footprint, although when you start adding using a combi or you start adding the biological, they can get a bit bigger, but generally by and large they do have quite a small footprint. If you're tight for space, they are a good option. That's it for the pros, so moving on to the cons. Absolutely, the elephant in the room here is the cost. There's no getting away from the fact that they're incredibly expensive. The biggest selling, most successful koi pond filter arguably is the Nexus. To give you an idea, cost-wise relative to a Nexus 320 plus, I think they're about £1,600 at the moment. A drum filter to filter the equivalent pond would be about £3,000, so not quite double, but certainly getting up there. So yeah, huge con to a drum filter is cost. There is no escaping that, they are expensive. Secondly, running costs. You will need a return pump as you would with any filter. Again, comparing it to the Nexus, what you won't have with the Nexus is the wash pump. Although they're not running for large periods of time, they do fire up regularly, albeit for short periods of time, but they are high wattage. They do consume a lot of energy, albeit for a short period of time. So certainly, I don't think it's significant. I don't think it's huge extra cost, but there is a running cost increase over a traditional, shall we say, a more traditional pond filter, such as a Nexus or a multi-bay or even a bead filter. Although again, some bead filters do have blowers, but they're utilised a lot less frequently than with a drum filter. Next, we've got reliability. For many years, drums were incredibly unreliable. There's so many horror stories. Recent years, there is no denying they have become more reliable as more people manufacture them, more experience under their belts. They are a lot more reliable than they used to be, but there's no getting away from the fact that they're infinitely more complicated than any other type of filter, and as such, by its, it's logical that there will be more issues. Is it enough to put you off owning one? I don't think it is these days, but it is absolutely vital that you look, when you're doing your research, if you're thinking of buying a drum, look at the warranty. Look at the length of the warranty and just absolutely the fine print, what exactly that entails. I've heard so many horror stories. I spoke to a guy, bought a drum filter, going back a bit now. He was given a warranty, put it on, the drum filter failed. He didn't realise until he contacted the manufacturer, that the guy was making these drum filters in a garage at the weekends, essentially, and nothing at all wrong with that. But what it does mean is there isn't that support network in place, and this guy was actually told to take the drum filter back to the other end of the country, drop it off with him, the manufacturer, they'd have a look at it, and then if they could fix it, he would then pick it up and take it back. Obviously I don't need to tell you how ridiculous it is to expect someone to do that. Do read the small print. Warranty is the biggest thing, and I mean it really is. All drum filters, they're passing water through a screen, 70 microns, 80 microns, whatever it may be, they all work. They all do the job of mechanical filtration extremely well. Where they differ is how you are looked after when something goes wrong, if something goes wrong, and hopefully it won't. Many years without any problems. But do look at the warranty if you're thinking of buying one. And I think it's difficult. Again, I spoke to people on the subscribers to the channel via the community tab about their experiences with drum filters. It's very, very difficult to because there's so many manufacturers, it's impossible for me to sort of review and judge every one of them. But if you're thinking of buying one, do your homework. Talk to people on Facebook groups, and we do have a great Facebook group called Koi Kichi. I'll do a little shameless plug. Get yourself on there. It's a brilliant, friendly group. Great advice. It's different to other groups, and if you have a look at it, you'll see what I mean. But speak to people who own them. Ask around. Find out who owns what drums, the experience they've had. Get yourself over to the place and have a look at it if you can. That's the best people to help you are the people who have already spent many thousands of pounds on one and experienced it and live with it. So just, yeah, do your homework well if you're thinking about buying a drum. And just before I move on from that, what I would say to you, again, I touched on the sort of the, it sounds one-man band type operations, the small guys. I'm absolutely not suggesting you avoid those. They come with their own benefits. Usually the cost of those is very competitive, but there's a lot to be said. I'm not affiliated anyway, I don't, but companies such as Oase, big multinational companies, a big support network in place to look after you, hopefully, if you have a problem. Obviously that does come at a cost, but something to consider. Another negative that came up when I spoke to drum owners on the channel was the noise levels. Not a biggie for me, this. I don't think this would bother me, but the wash pumps are quite noisy. The generating pressure, the nozzles themselves, that cleaning process is quite noisy. It doesn't go on for long, but it is quite frequent. I have heard of people having complaints from the neighbours from the noise of the pump. I've also, a guy on the channel would love a drum but simply won't buy one because of the noise the wash pump makes. So it can be a factor, not necessarily for me, but again, something else to consider. Something that came up again when I spoke to drum owners was maintenance. Again, I've alluded to, I've made a point of calling a drum low maintenance rather than maintenance free. There are some elements of maintenance. One that came up consistently throughout was the waste chute. So where the nozzles spray and the waste goes onto a chute, that's a very shallow angle on that chute, takes the water away under gravity, it just flows away. That chute blocks, when I say blocks, it builds up with debris over time. It seems to be that all drums suffer from that. It's not one or the other. There will be drums that are more prone to it or will build up quicker than others. You'll have to do your research on that. It's impossible for me to research them all. But suffice to say, they all will need that chute cleaning at some point. Cleaning it isn't difficult. It's a case of washing it off, brushing it off, whatever. The regularity of that from the people I spoke to varied from twice a week to once a month. So, you know, there is variation, but do keep in mind that will be something you need to do. The other thing is the screen itself. Because we're talking about very fine holes, the screens are getting fed dirty water, so pond water containing ammonia and subsequently nitrite. So there's food source there for bacteria, and as such the bacteria will build up on the drum screen. So that screen itself will build up a biofilm, and that biofilm, because of the very small holes, the sizes that we're talking, that biofilm will narrow those holes and ultimately lead them to block. So you need to remove that biofilm from your drum screen periodically, and that really is as simple as stiff paintbrush, brushing the screen with white wine vinegar, lemon juice, citric acid, something of that nature, just to get rid of the biofilm. Once a month, once every couple of months is sufficient. I will just touch on, I've got a video coming up shortly on things we waste our money on. I've just in my head thought I need to add to that drum screen cleaner. Companies have now sort of jumped on this bandwagon. They're producing screen cleaners. They're calling them drum screen cleaners, putting them in a bottle, putting a picture of a koi on, quadrupling the price. Essentially, white wine vinegar or citric acid is all you need. Don't waste your money on those bespoke, you know, on those cleaners specifically with heaps of koi tax on. So to begin summarising then, a drum filter absolutely excels at taking mechanical waste out of the water continuously at source rather than holding it in the water until you clean your filter. It absolutely excels. That is the only area arguably where it excels. In terms of the size of the particles it takes out, there are other filters that take out finer particles. The Tempest, for example, a correctly set up bead filter. So it doesn't excel at the performance in terms of the size of the mechanical waste it removes. Other filters such as a Nexus, multi-bay with etc. The other filters add more aeration than a drum filter. There are other filters with smaller footprints than a drum filter, for example a bead. There are filters, obviously nearly every filter on the market is cheaper than a drum filter. There are filters out there such as a shower which are better at the kind of biological side. They'll remove nitrate as well as nitrite and ammonia. Pretty much every filter out there has less to go wrong, so is more reliable. So as I say, a drum filter really only excels at this one area. So the conclusion then, if my opinion whether a drum filter is worth the money, I guess, is what it boils down to. And the answer, in my opinion, is absolutely yes, without any shadow of a doubt. For that alone, a drum filter is absolutely priceless. If I could afford one, I would have one in a heartbeat.